house. So this is it. Mama Tinu yelled, her voice shaking with fury as she glared at Ao. After all the money I gave you, this is what you have to show for it. Failure again. Ao emerged from the back room, his face weary and his clothes stained from the day's work. He sighed heavily, knowing exactly what was coming as he faced Mama Tinu's fiery glare. Mama, please calm down, Bidemi said cautiously, stepping forward to shield her husband. Don't you dare tell me to calm down. Mama Tinu snapped, turning her anger on her daughter. You begged me, Bidemi. You knelt before me, swearing that the money I gave you would help Ao build something for both of you. And now look. He started poultry farming, and everything failed. My money, gone, just like that. Ao's jaw tightened, his fist clenching at his sides as he struggled to keep his composure. Mama Tinu, I didn't plan for the poultry to fail, he said, his voice strained. I don't know what happened, and I don't know how they all died. I'm not to blame for this. Mama Tinu whirled on him, her voice dripping with contempt. Not to blame. Then who is? You're not a man, Ao. A real man would find a way to make things work. This is the third time you failed, and every single time it's my daughter who suffers. Mama, please, Bidemi interrupted, her voice trembling as tears welled in her eyes. Ao is trying his best. These things happen. We are still figuring things out. Figuring things out. Mama Tinu laughed bitterly, her hands on her hips. You're living in poverty, Bidemi. Eating scraps. And you want to keep figuring things out with this man. When will you wake up and see the truth? He's cursed. Nothing he touches will ever succeed. Ao, his pride wounded, finally raised his voice. Mama, with all due respect, I don't need you to remind me of my failures. I live with them every single day. But you have no right to come into my home and insult me like this. The room fell silent for a moment, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Bidemi glanced between her mother and her husband, her heart breaking at the sight of the two people she loved the most tearing each other apart. You're home. Mama Tinu shot back, her voice rising with fury. This isn't a home, it's a prison for my daughter. And I will not stand by and watch you drag her down with you. Mama, that's enough. Bidemi shouted, her voice trembling as tears streamed down her face. She turned to her mother, her words laced with pain. I love Ao. I chose him, and I'll stand by him no matter what. If that means struggling, then so be it. But I won't leave him just because you think he's cursed. Mama Tinu shook her head, her disappointment clear in her expression. You're as stubborn as your father was, she muttered under her breath. Fine, stay here and suffer. But don't come crying to me again when you've got nothing left. As she reached the door, she added sharply, and don't think you'll get another kobo from me again. I've given you all I can, and look where it's gotten me, nothing but shame. She slammed the door behind her, leaving an oppressive silence in her wake. Bidemi collapsed to the floor, her sobs echoing through the small house. Ao stood frozen, his hands trembling with frustration, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of failure. He wanted to go to her, to hold her, but the weight of his own emotions pinned him in place. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry, Bidemi. For everything. She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears but her resolve unshaken. Ao, we'll get through this. God is still with us. We just have to keep believing. Ao nodded, though doubt weighed heavily on his heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the house in shadows, he prayed silently, his thoughts a desperate plea for hope. Somewhere deep inside, he clung to the faint hope that one day, their fortunes would change. While Ao's life spiraled into depths he never imagined, he could find himself doing the same kind of work he once paid others to do. A man who had once been a respected businessman now labored as a bush clearer, cutting down trees and preparing farmland for villagers in exchange for a meager wage. His hands, once soft from handling contracts and signing deals, were now rough, blistered, and scarred. Each swing of the machete was a painful reminder of how far he had fallen. It hurt him even more to look at Bidemi, who sat by their small wooden shack weaving hair for the few villagers who dared to come to her. Their once envied life had become the subject of mockery in the village. Whispers of their downfall followed them everywhere. Not long after, Bidemi discovered she was pregnant again. The news brought mixed emotions, both joy and a deep, gnawing fear. What if this pregnancy ended in heartbreak, like the last one? The thought was unbearable, so she chose to keep the news to herself for a few weeks, waiting to be sure before telling Eo. One evening, Bidemi decided to celebrate the news with a small feast, a rare moment of happiness in their otherwise bleak lives. It had been months since they'd had more than Gary or the fruits they plucked from their compound. Every bit of money they made went to solving one problem or another. But this time, Bidemi was determined to make a proper meal. With the little money she had painstakingly saved, she went to the market, carefully selecting ingredients. When she returned home, she spent hours in the kitchen, slicing, stirring, and seasoning. As she reached for the pestle and mortar to pound some spices, a strange, unshakable feeling washed over her, a sudden unease that sent chills down her spine. She froze, her hand hovering over the mortar. Shaking her head, Bidemi brushed the feeling aside and resumed her task, pounding the spices quickly and finishing the cooking. The aroma of the meal filled the air, a rare moment of warmth in their cold, quiet lives. She prayed silently as she prepared, hoping this meal would mark the start of something new, a turning point for her family. When El came home that evening, the tension in the air was palpable. He barely touched the meal Bidemi had spent hours preparing, muttering about how tough his day had been. Bidemi tried to comfort him, gently placing a hand on his shoulder, but he shrugged her off and retreated to their bedroom without a word. In her distress, she forgot to share the news about the baby. Later that night, Bidemi woke up to sharp, stabbing pains in her stomach. Panic consumed her as she clutched her belly, crying out, "Eo." Her voice was desperate, filled with fear and pain. Eo woke with a start but immediately frowned. "What is it?" he barked, his tone laced with irritation. Bidemi sobbed, "My baby, my baby." But Eo did nothing. He stared at her for a moment, then turned over and went back to sleep. Bidemi's heart shattered as she stared at her husband, shocked and betrayed by his indifference. Desperate, she hit him on the shoulder, begging him to help her. Eo sat up, his eyes cold and menacing. "If you ever lay your hands on me again," he warned, his voice low and threatening, "you will feel my wrath." Then, with a sneer, he added, "Barren woman." The words cut through Bidemi like a knife. She retreated, her fear paralyzing her, unsure of what he might do if she pressed him further. Alone in the dark, she bore the excruciating pain, crying silently until dawn. When morning came, Bidemi was certain she had lost the baby, but she kept the grief to herself. She was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone about her third miscarriage, and she knew the whispers in the village would only worsen if word got out. The pain became her burden to bear alone. Meanwhile, Eo began spending